So in our first couple of videos, we talked about the idea that sex is never about sex, that there's something far deeper happening in the human heart, right? There's this connection between, our physical, but also our spiritual, and that our hearts are worshiping idols. We're idol-making factories, like Jonathan Edwards said. And that we're constantly looking to one of four source idols: power, comfort, approval, or control, to find a sense of identity, a sense of value and worth. And in this video, I want to talk about the concept of where we go from there. And the second idea is this: we're all broken. Now, if you've grown up in the church or in church leadership, this concept that we're all broken sometimes has been lost when it comes to the area of intimacy, sex, sexuality. I've grown up in the church my whole life, and we talked about in the first video some of the phases of the church has gone through in addressing this. Right? The first phase was kind of abstinence and encouraging people to wait until they're married, and then we went through homosexuality, and now we're in kind of talking about the issue of transgenderism. And one of the things that's happened throughout the phases of the church addressing sexual behavior, intimacy, sexuality is we, in a lot of ways, have really fumbled the issue. We've made some major mistakes. And one of the mistakes that I think that we've made is we have oftentimes distanced ourselves as we are people that don't struggle with the issues that you struggle with. So people that are on stage, pastors or teachers or preachers, oftentimes when they talk about these areas and they talk about what the Bible says about them, they talk about them in such a way as if the person communicating isn't broken and everybody else who is struggling with those issues is. And so I'm good, I'm not broken because I'm in a heterosexual married relationship, but all of you are broken because you're either struggling with pornography, struggling with homosexuality, wrestling through transgender issues, right? So you're broken, I'm not. And I'm not saying that's the intention of every leader, but one of the things that we've done as a church is we've created that dichotomy of you're broken, I'm not. And unfortunately, what that's done is, I think, a couple of things. What it's done, number one, is it's created a sense of, I can't be real with my struggles in the church. People have felt like instead of the church, my pastor, my leadership being the place that I can go to find help, and work on the issues I'm struggling with, I can't go there because I'm one of the broken ones and they're not. They won't understand. They won't be able to relate. So it has actually distanced people who are in the midst of struggling in this area of intimacy, sex, sexuality. And instead of them becoming healthier in those areas, they've actually become more estranged. They've left the church, become more distant, which ultimately, of course, we know equals them being less and less healthy along the way. So that's one of the things that it's done. But the other thing that it's done is it's, I think, created in a misguided sense that I am, as a leader, healthy in this area, when in fact, there's a possibility that I am not, right? So we've potentially ostracized some people in our churches, some people that we're leading who are struggling. But then the second thing we've done is we've convinced ourselves that we're good and we can check this box off, when in reality, I think what the gospel is going to reveal is this may be more of an issue. We may be far more broken than many of us realize. So if the issue when it comes to sin and when it comes to sexuality is idolatry and worship, what that means is behavior is not the only metric. I remember my wife and I have been married for about 2 years. And we went through a patch in our life where our intimacy was not great. And we're going through kind of a season, which is not that abnormal for married couples. Sometimes things happen and you go through that, right? And I remember during that time feeling super frustrated, super angry, and in particularly really angry at her. And I also felt depressed and kind of down on myself. And as we came out of that patch and things got better, I remember feeling like I felt better about myself. I felt more hopeful. And then I became less angry and frustrated at her. And there started to be this cycle that I saw in my life. And as I started to think more and more about it, one of the things that I realized is I was far more broken than what I had thought. See, I had always believed growing up in the church that once I got married and I was in a heterosexual relationship, that my brokenness and sin when it came to sexuality was gone. As long as I didn't look at porn, as long as I wasn't gay, as long as I was in a married, loving relationship, then I didn't have to worry about sexual sin. That wasn't a part of my life. And I think that's the belief of many. But what I came to realize is this cycle in my own life is that for me, what sex is it wasn't really about sex. It was actually about worshiping this idol of approval. See, I began to realize I was far more broken than I ever thought. For me, my relationship, my intimacy with my wife, which was supposed to be about us connecting and sharing, actually became about me using her to get what my heart really wanted, which was this sense of approval. I wanted to feel like she wanted me, she approved of me, she needed me. This idol that I had so deeply wanted to worship in my heart of approval, I was using her and using our sexual relationship to worship that idol. And so when the intimacy wasn't there, either in the frequency that I wanted or the quality that I wanted, I felt like she was depriving me of the idol that my heart really wanted. And therefore, I became angry at her. She was the thing getting in the way of what my heart wanted. And I think if we're honest with ourselves, what it reveals is that I am far more broken than I ever realized. And so for many of us, as we examine this, here's the revelation, right? That just because you are not part of certain groups that have been deemed as sexually sinful or wrong doesn't mean that you are also not broken. What it tells us is we're all broken. And the way that we know that is, here's the definition of sexual sin or sin when it comes to intimacy. It's not just doing bad things. It's whenever we use sex or sexuality in order to worship something other than Jesus. Whenever we use, another way to put it whenever we use sex and sexuality to gain a sense of identity outside of Christ, it's sinful. It's not the way that Jesus designed it. It's not how God designed it for our life. And so sex is meant to be this bringing of two people together in a monogamous, committed relationship to form this deeply physical and spiritual connection between the two, right? Both giving of themselves to each other. So whenever we manipulate that and use it for something that it's not, whenever we use it for identity, whether that's pornography, whether that's in a monogamous married relationship like I described in my story, whether that's in a homosexual relationship or transgender, and I'm trying to find my identity, whenever we begin to attach identity to the areas of sex and sexuality, that is sin. And if we're honest, we all do it. All of us. No matter where you are out in life, if we're honest with ourselves, there are times that we do that exact thing. If you remember the story in the Bible where Jesus is being confronted, right, about adultery, and he says, hey, I'll tell you what, anybody who's even lusted after a woman is committed adultery. See, we kind of in the church have taken that and we think, oh, what Jesus is doing is he's drawing another line in the sand, right? They had the line, which is if you commit adultery, that's a sin. And he's saying, no, I'm moving that line. But in fact, I think what Jesus is doing is not drawing another line. He's actually drawing a circle. He's drawing a circle around all of them and saying, don't you see, you're all broken. Every single one of you is broken. And so you're casting stones and you're acting like you're better than other people when in fact you are just as broken because you've taken something beautiful, which is sex and sexuality, and you've used it as a way to worship something other than God. And so when we think about this, here's how this helps us. Number one, it helps us because for you as an individual, it can encourage you to dive deep and look into your own life and come to the realization of maybe there's some things that I'm struggling with that I wasn't even aware of. Maybe there's some things in my own, if you're married, your own marriage that you need to look at and wrestle through. Are you using sex in your relationship in a way that it shouldn't be used, right? Are you manipulating your spouse? Are you holding them accountable to give you things that is not their job in the area of approval or power or security or comfort? And if you're leading people, here's how we want to encourage you. When you're talking about these issues, let's talk about them in two ways. Number one, let's talk about them with an openness to the fact that we're all broken. We're all in this together. Right? But I'll also encourage you, let's talk about them with a humility. Be willing to talk about your own struggle, your own brokenness, so that the people that you're leading understand that you are a person they can come to. The church is a place that they can find hope and restoration. We're not saying avoid truth, but what we're saying is talk about it with humility and openness so that the people around you can ultimately find the health that we all want to see. Leaving people floundering, continuing down the paths that they're going, hoping that it will bring them some sort of peace and happiness, is not helping them at all. So we've got to lead by example and figure out our own hearts, and then ultimately being open to help others discover theirs. At the end of the day, we're all broken. And the good news is going to come in the next video, because what we're going to find out in the next one is how Jesus makes sex right, how he heals our hearts in the area of sex and sexuality.